Welcome to Scrolling to Death. Today I have an incredible guest, Tim Estes, founder and CEO of a child-safe AI company called Angel AI, which we will hear about today. So welcome, Tim.
Thanks, Nikki, for having me. Looking forward to it.
Of course. And I was able to catch your session in DC last month at the Nicosi Global Summit. And what I loved specifically about what you shared is that you have two young children and you are dedicated to finding ways to allow them to use tech and even use AI, but for good and for ways that are safe when most companies are really putting profit over kids' safety. So if you can just start by telling us about Angel AI and what led you to create this resource for families.
Yeah. So Angel Kids, we started about a year and a half ago, raised some capital to build essentially a replacement of the browser for children.
Mm.
So the browser is the gateway to the internet in most cases, the browser and various apps. And we believe that we could use some of the major advances in AI essentially to be an intermediary between younger kids, 5 to 12-year-olds, and the online world. And this would be a compelling middle path from essentially complete trying to turn it off and deferral of technology use, which is very hard. I'd read your post about Chromebooks and what you face personally. Like it's very hard to essentially have a technology-free environment. And the truth is, we don't really want that. We accept that because the environment we have with technology is so bad.
Yes, exactly.
It shouldn't be that way.
Right.
So what motivated Angel Kids was I had built a previous AI company for about 20 years in the communication surveillance space, originally looking at stuff post 9/11, connecting the dots from tons of unstructured data and finding bad guys, basically. And then worked in some other industries. So I understood that the problem space of finding bad stuff and trying to flag it early pretty well. And I had a year off from all my work in 2022 after building and selling that company. And I got the story about Nyla Anderson sent to me.
Okay.
And I'm guessing you've covered Nyla here.
I have in the recent decision.
Yeah, the decision recently is just a godsend. I mean, Tawana, the mom, I just really rooting for her. And so I saw that story, and if you don't mind me restating, so the audience is refreshed.
Yes,
it's a 10-year-old African-American female from Philadelphia who was left on TikTok because it was just a bunch of silly dance videos. The algorithm served her up the blackout challenge. And this little girl went to her mother's closet, hung herself up by her mother's purse, trying to emulate it, and killed herself. And it was such an egregious evil that I was sort of moved to say that, we should basically put an AI between every child on the internet. That was the goal. And there are some great people out there who have been doing parts of this. I think Bark has done great work. There's other parties that have done great work here. We were previously in my last company involved closely with Thorn and building a giant anti-child sex trafficking system called Spotlight for them.
Yeah.
And in that one, Ashton Kutcher had a great phrase, which is, in this mission, we have no competitors, only allies. And I feel like the same way is true of this space. It is such an underserved problem that we actually need several companies all working hard to make a compelling alternative to what we have today.
Yeah.
And so Angel was really about, okay, all this curiosity was there around ChatGPT. Having a 5 and 8-year-old boy, myself, I noticed the first way they were using technology is they would go and double click, the button to make Siri talk to them. And they would ask questions like, Siri, tell me a joke, or Siri, translate that to Spanish. And they were naturally a voice-based browser of knowledge.
Yeah.
So that felt like the way to provide for them something that met them where they're at, which was now technically possible. And if we essentially can be that bridge to understand the child, answer their questions, and then find material that's relevant to them and bring it to them, but assure it every step of the way, we can essentially create a safe environment that still allows them to be curious and explore. And so you don't have to choose between no technology or unsafe technology.
Right. That's where I'm at. I'm choosing pretty much no technology. And we've had the Alexa though in our common space, and now they start asking her all kinds of things. And I'm like, maybe I need to even remove that. How safe is Alexa? Because I know a lot of parents have that in the home.
Amazon of the companies has been one of the better ones.
Okay.
Now the bar is very low. as we do.
Yeah.
And so, like, would I ever trust my kid, probably at any age, to be on, an AI from Snap or Meta? Absolutely not.
Mhm.
Amazon has actually made a pretty good investment in some of their Amazon Kids efforts.
Mhm.
We have parents like in our team, and that's one of the only things that they'll leverage and use. Now, having said that, Amazon is now working closely with Anthropic,
Okay.
upgrading Alexa to be kind of smarter with that technology. And Anthropic, I would call out positively, like they're of the various large language model companies, they probably have the most credible commitment to safety and in their
Mhm.
design.
Mhm.
In fact, you could argue some of the people that founded that company broke away from OpenAI over that issue.
Mhm.
So long story short, I think that everything needs to be better, but on a scale of like absolutely like negligence leading to harm, and then like okay and still watch over the shoulder. Like I
Mhm.
think Amazon's in the okay but watch over the shoulder category in a lot of this stuff.
Okay. Okay.
And we're having to go in and do a lot of things with that technology to assure it. And when we get through with some of that, we'll probably open some of it up to the community.
Okay. Okay. Let me know. And so, because of the work that I do in the child advocacy space, I hear a lot of the stories and cover a lot of the stories of when children are harmed. And many times in today's day and age, AI is included. And you mentioned the AI chatbots on things like Snapchat and Meta, and they were really rolled out but unsafe. And
Yeah.
so there are stories of these chatbots putting out really inappropriate and dangerous information. So, like, what went wrong in these cases? Did the companies rush into rolling these out and not ensure the data input was safe?
Yeah, basically. I mean, it's a good
Okay.
summary. I mean, the Silicon Valley motto is move fast and break things. And the problem is when humans are your product, then you move fast and break human beings. And so they're breaking children. And so it's actually almost obvious, like that we ended up here because essentially of the ethic, which was caring not much about your customers because your customers was a means to an end to your achievement.
How do you justify that, Tim? Because, and I've asked, David Erb this recently, the Facebook whistleblower, but how do you justify that these executives are making decisions that they know will harm children?
I mean, it's probably not unlike various industries in history, some of which were great polluters, some of which created toxic things like cigarettes and killed tons and tons of teenagers by making them more addicted.
Hmm.
Like we have a history of various parties creating new offerings, some of which have very bad side effects, and then hiding those side effects long after they know of harms
Hmm.
until the society finally gets so fed up that it
Hmm.
forces regulation and enforces like accountability. And where we hopefully are in that moment, time will tell.
Yeah.
But this is a whole nother level because like we've never had $1 trillion companies where this was their business model.
Right.
And I just like I'll give it a couple of examples, and I might have to give this in my talk, but Facebook makes about $120 billion in revenue or Meta rather, in their last year. About 30 billion of that's pure profit. They probably spend 3 billion or less on safety. And of that, that also includes like cybersecurity safety. So we're not even talking about just things to protect like kids. That might be a tiny fraction of that.
Hmm.
So other industries might be spending 7 to 10% or 11% of revenues on safety and compliance issues. I spent a lot of
Hmm.
time in banking, and they have huge obligations. And what I find interesting, I use an analogy when I brief on Capitol Hill, like if HSBC said, well, we can't protect against money laundering because it's encrypted,
Hmm.
they would last 5 seconds before a regulator shows up, finds them $1 billion, and puts someone on their board to monitor them for 4 years. And that's actually happened.
Hmm.
Meta says it's end-to-end encrypted. We can't do anything about it. And now people are dying, like not just money laundering, like dying. And there is no consequence. And so that's where just something has gone very much awry.
Hmm.
But it's actually half the fault of the court system and half the fault of our leaders.
Hmm.
And maybe it's a little bit of our fault, not as parents for failing to protect because it's been an unfair fight the whole way,
Yep.
but probably because we may not have paid enough attention when the early signs were there. And
Hmm.
now it's so out of our control.
Hmm. And you mentioned the end-to-end encryption. I mean, and Meta uses that now. I mean, these social media companies use it to avoid liability for what
Right.
happens in those conversations. But Meta actually, when they were Facebook, added that in end-to-end encryption after they already knew that tens of millions of children were getting actively groomed on their platform. But and then you mentioned obligation, and these companies aren't making their platform safe or not prioritizing safety because they're not being obligated to, right, by regulation and legislation. And so we'll talk about legislation, but I want to cover a few of these things for parents. So you mentioned Meta's AI and Snapchat's AI. Just to close that out, would you recommend parents just turn those off on their child's devices?
Yeah, I think that, I think that one of the things that's interesting is technology historically has been about essentially getting us more productive and giving us more net capacity. And
Mm-hmm.
social media as a whole, with very limited exceptional cases,
Mm-hmm.
is actually the opposite of that. It's in
Mm-hmm.
general making us less
Less
productive,
yeah.
have worse health, think poorly about ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
and yet occupy a tremendous amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like the anti-technology technology. If
Mm-hmm.
you are more of a technology like optimist, like I want to be, but when you
Yep.
take technology that's powerful and you put it into people's hands, that the only explanation I have for the neglect that you're flagging and that I'm also kind of reiterating
Mm-hmm.
is an ethical failure.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's just, if anyone could, wake up and look in themselves in the mirror, knowing the CSAM that flows through Instagram and know it's there for years, and not say, okay, all C staff, we're meeting tomorrow morning. I want this dealt with in 30 days.
Yeah.
Like, that is what, or even like, I want it shut down until we have a way to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what's missing. What's missing, and it's fortunately there's a little bit of the capitalistic element of there's no liability, so there's no limits. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the part we have to balance out, probably regulation. But if we had, frankly, a better class of leaders in this area, like, the companies wouldn't operate that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have a technology problem that is actually just an echo of an ethical problem.
And so, given that situation that we're in now, and set aside turning off the AI chatbots on these platforms, on these social media platforms, are you suggesting that parents should just not let their kids on the social media platforms in the current state that they're in?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any value, especially if they're below 16. I think even above 16, they're not really of much value, period. But I think that, I would never let, any of our kids be engaged on that, into that age group.
Yeah.
And I hope that over the years, I've got 8 years with one, and I've got, about 11 with the other one to go. I'm hoping enough influence will happen to where by the time they get there, they're like, that's the lamest thing I ever heard of. Like, why would
Mm-hmm.
I freely put all this stuff of mine out there and have my psychology hooked into what people thought about it en masse, many of which are almost strangers?
Right.
Like, when did that actually be a thing?
I don't know, Tim. How did we get here? I think about it a lot.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you mentioned there's a scale of, AI tools that are harmful and doing an okay job. What are some of the ones that are the most harmful that parents should stay away from or keep their kids away from?
So the ones I think that are and this is where I want the kids should stay away from them. But the problem is when other kids that aren't your kid or other
Mm-hmm.
parties that are not your kid use them, which is, I think, the image generation systems. There
Mm-hmm.
are one's called unstable diffusion.
Okay.
And there are ones out there that essentially have had safeguards ripped off, and they are basically engines for near CSAM, meaning they can be tweaked, they can be made. This is the stuff that's probably going to be most apocalyptic. Is right now that's a problem on images with the Nudify apps that are on the App Store that had to be ripped down and those kinds of things. But
Yeah.
it's going to get so much worse because they're going to be able to do it with video, at scale, 4K quality soon, it's
Mm-hmm.
coming.
Mm-hmm.
And I briefed some people in the House leadership about this, and about 6 months ago, I said, "You have a CSAM apocalypse coming when the technology that Sora showed from OpenAI becomes an open source capability people can build on."
Mm-hmm.
And we're weeks or months from that. We're not a year from that. And
Okay.
so I think that the most important thing probably is be protective of your data and your kid's image,
Mm-hmm.
however you can. And then, obviously lean in with I think Senator Blackburn has another piece of legislation, and there's maybe another couple of them that is going to radically raise the penalty around these deep fakes and other things, criminalize these types of things in a much more aggressive way. It's going to go into the class of things of, we can't stop people from having the tools, but we can make the people who use them pay for it so badly that it deters.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where we're at right now. But what we could be doing is we could be telling these companies, like even Meta, with, like, right now, they've released the best open source model, Llama 3.1, and it's actually better than ChatGPT was when it launched, which is amazing. It's free.
Wow.
Okay. And that's
Wow.
18 months later. That's amazing. And they're going to come out with one that does video and audio and imagery pretty soon. Whether it's weeks or it's months, it will probably happen by year end. And that will democratize this. So before they do that, like, it needs to be incumbent that they put in critical safeguards in their approach. And they also control the licensing. So they can enforce massive liability anyone who uses it otherwise. So these companies at a board level could essentially create standards that they enforce. And they shouldn't be waiting on liability to do that if they're actually good citizens. But I hope they do. Some do it, but most of the time, I think we just have to make there be liability, so they have to be good citizens.
Yeah. Well, they're still going to move fast and break things, right? And it takes time to add that kind of regulation internally. So just so parents understand, there are already Notify apps available in the App Store where a kid can, or anyone, the user, can upload a photo. It could be of your child, and click one button and all their clothes come off and it makes them look realistically nude. And so we're already dealing with that. But what you're saying is that very soon they're going to be able to take an image of your child, take off the clothes, and then make it a video, make it
do whatever they want to do.
Do whatever they want them to do. Right. Okay. So
yeah.
So how safe are photos of our children on the internet right now?
Not very safe.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, not very safe at all. And so this is actually an area where, like, it's not a problem we're able to solve yet on Angel Kids. And I don't have it in our roadmap to deal with it, but we frankly probably need some clever technology that will watermark the personal photos that makes them impossible to machine read. There actually is some tech to do that, where you can essentially watermark data and make it impossible for a machine to read it. It sort of chokes on it when it tries to process it.
Wow.
It's very clever technology. And I think if we had a group that was trying to democratize that for parents, that would be really good, because then you could essentially post. You still would only post in trusted channels, but you could post there, and it would at least be at least a speed bump, on the way to these dark places.
Doesn't the technology already exist to identify that a photo is a minor?
Pretty much. I mean, that was the thing about, like, I was there, and you might have been as well, but when the 5 CEOs testified back in January, I was there in the room. And I remember that moment where Senator Cruz puts up that giant placard and essentially says, to Zuckerberg, he says, like, you have this warning that this is likely leading to CSAM, child sexual abuse material.
Right. And
there still is the link, go to it anyway. And he said, in what sane world do you ever even put that there? And the explanation was, well, we aren't really sure. Those algorithms are 90 to 95% accurate at this point, maybe better at this point. And they have the best in the world, or at least the top 2 or 3 at Meta right now. The idea that 19 out of 20 of those link events would lead to child abuse, and you let it happen because maybe 5 of them don't, instead of putting a simple process, which is, request review of that material by a third party before showing it. Like, that would be the easy answer. And that's not what they did. Why? There's friction in one, and there's not friction in the other. Yeah. And friction means loss of money.
Yes. They're making money off of the exchange of child sexual abuse material.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's remarkable. We have all these events where, people would have their homes raided for servers that have hundreds or thousands of pieces of child, abuse material on them, and they go to jail for hopefully years or decades. We have companies hosting tens of millions of these, and no one's in jail.
Right.
And it's something I just can't, I can't fathom. I spent enough time with, people like in the banking community that were trying to police and look for the few bad guys that gave them all a bad name. And, when they missed something, the consequences were big. Like I said, billions of fines, years of overhead. And I don't know that those harms, even though, that laundered money might be doing terrible things, I don't know those harms are as bad as what's happened to our children.
Well, what do you think about the arrest of Telegram CEO Pavel Durov? Do you think that there could be a domino effect with CEOs being held liable for these harms?
That's a complicated one, because I do think that Telegram is just a kind of a cesspool. Yeah. But it also, I think there's challenges, for instance, with X. I think, Elon though actually has some pro kid views. And so I kind of wish X would just make it impossible to be on X unless you're 18 or over. Like that would be a simple solution for them. And then they can be as, libertine as they want to be. But right now we know that's not what's going on. So, and so I look at those examples, and there are many others. Discord, another example. I mean, he was up there having to testify, and there's all kinds of stuff that goes through that. And so I think what I'd say is, it is the Telegram one is one where I think we have to be careful that these are real crimes that are happening. And so in the CSIM area, I think they ought to throw the book at these people. If it ends up being a question of, quote, misinformation, where it could be a difference of viewpoint, that's to me far less criminal.
Yeah. Okay.
Sure. And so I think there's a little blending of that, because I think both things were cited by the French government. And I don't like it when those things are blended, because they're not the same.
Right. I agree.
Someone lying online is bad. It's nowhere near as bad as CSAM. It just isn't in the same category. And so I think they ought to go after the egregious stuff, hold them accountable, throw them in jail if necessary on those issues. But I think these other issues, if they're actually just blending it up to try to get a group to change the way they behave for political reasons, then that's a problem. And so that's kind of what's also, lit up people who might align with us on these issues that are deeply tied to the First Amendment.
Right.
There are well-intentioned people who are scared of COSA, for instance, over First Amendment things, even if there's a ton of misinformation around it. The people are not bad people that have some of those views. They just sort of need to be worked through, or the language needs to be tweaked. So it's obviously not that. But it's kind of hard to be able to conflate speech issues. To me, these things we already say are crimes. And so let's just focus on the stuff that's absolutely crimes. And so you mentioned the Instagram piece. One thing I think I've talked to a couple of people about this, but I'm surprised it hasn't been brought up yet. So most of these cases, including like the New Mexico and the AG case against Meta, they had discovery requests into Meta before Instagram was turning on end-to-end encryption. Now, under the law, when you encrypt something and you, quote, can't get it back, that is the same thing as destroying it.
Wow,
and so there is this idea of spoilage in electronic discovery that carries massive fines for every event. And it might be that Meta created the biggest act of digital spoilage in history by flipping on end-to-end encryption, making them liable for billions of dollars in fines for that event alone.
And that data you can never access that data.
Well, there is probably a way they can access it. They won't want to admit it, but I can probably tell the court how they can get it back. Okay. There is a way. Okay. But the bottom line is that they don't want to admit that, because that would show the fact that the whole encryption thing, for the most part, always has a certain kind of backdoor. Unless the system has a hub and it has the ability to control the client, there's always a backdoor. Okay. And that's something that, but they don't want to go in and say they have that backdoor. You know why? Because they go find that CSAM. Now it's not conjecture. It's actually there. So it's a little bit of, they've now backed themselves in the corner. They destroyed the evidence, which makes them liable. But if they get the evidence back, they'll have to basically cough up the idea that they've had this stuff all along. And so hopefully the court and our AGs will pierce through that, and private citizens will pierce through that. And that will, create consequences, COSA or no COSA.
Yeah. Thank goodness for the state of New Mexico. For now, they're suing Snapchat. So there's a lot of interesting things coming out about Snapchat as well. And to wrap up this little bit of the conversation, I spoke with Senator Cruz last week, and we did talk about his legislation to further penalize the sharing of CSAM, whether it's made with AI or not. And so listeners can head over there to listen to that update. I wanted to touch on AI integration into school settings. What do you think is appropriate at this time? Should we be allowing students or teachers to use AI given the current state of it, or should we be waiting until it's more regulated and safer?
I kind of understand maybe a little bit of both sides of that kind of equation. And so let me start with a more optimistic view, and then, lay some standards down that, if can't be met, lead to a more pessimistic view. Okay. The optimistic view is that, AI, Steve Jobs used to say that, technology was the bicycle of the mind, and AI in theory is like the motorcycle of the mind.
Hmm.
It is the same concept, but potentially radically faster, like more able to go further distances and do things.
Hmm.
There's a lot of value in it. I mean, the ability of it to distill a lot of information, summarize it, and then think about it. But the critical part is design. It's basically, how do you make sure that in an educational environment, the AI is there to help the child think and help the child think about thinking
Yeah. Yeah.
instead of packaging up, essentially mediocre answers and therefore not thinking. And so
Hmm.
if AI becomes like Google Maps does, I mean, I don't know if you faced this in your life. I faced it in my last 20 years. I used to know my
Yeah.
way around a few cities pretty well.
Right.
And even though as I move around now, oftentimes I still use Google Maps to go places. Is the feeling of security.
Hmm.
But I also realize I'm not learning anything else. Like, I don't know how to get anywhere else in the city because I stopped learning how to do that
And we're
because I could just plug
adults
it in.
we have
Right.
developed brains and we
Yeah.
still
And
lose it.
so that's a challenge, I think. I think that's the bar. Is it has to be provable, or at least highly probable that the approach AI is being used in. Let's put an example. There's a great tool called Synthesis that is
Okay.
about teaching math through AI. It was built by a bunch of people that were essentially creating outsourced curriculum for like the children of SpaceX employees. These are
Mm.
very, very smart, like mathematicians and scientists
Yeah.
that they wanted to, tutor their kids, and they built this thing. And it's not there to tell them the answer. It is very thoughtfully built to actually evolve their understanding.
Hmm.
And so AI has the ability to translate things that previously were hard to translate to kid. It's one of the great potentials that hasn't been fully tapped. And a lot of ways, that's what we're doing in Angel Kids AI, is to do translation versus blocking, because
Hmm.
then the kids get something. They don't just want to get around it.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a way to use it positively. So I'll start there. However, I think naively just turning it on and letting it go is problematic. And it could be that OpenAI becomes like the McDonald's of the mind.
Hmm.
And so I think that it's very possible these language models become in some ways replacement of food. Much like replacement of food with like junk food or processed food.
Hmm.
And that hasn't been good for us either. A whole nother topic, but like there's almost no doubt that journey for us has been bad for the net health of people. And it will be similarly bad for people's intelligence and their capacities unless it's essentially refined to have specific goals, which are about advancing the curiosity and the
Yeah.
capacity of the children versus becoming essentially a second memory bank for them where they don't have to remember anything. Because if you don't remember things, the way the brain works is things start in your short-term memory, and then it moves into this midterm memory when you focus on it long enough, and then you sleep on it and it comes in the long term. And that reorganization of the mind ends up creating the conceptualizations that let us have our ideas and our frameworks.
Hmm.
When you're in an environment, this is why TikTok, all these things, hyperlinks before it were so challenging, where you're dumping your short-term memory all the time. You barely remember what you saw 5 minutes ago because you've got some new stimuli.
Hmm.
When that happens, you're starving the higher parts of your brain of what it needs to actually build up really compelling, foundations for knowledge and reasoning and empathy.
Hmm.
And that's why I think at root, these highly like dopamine addiction systems, or these systems of ease, on the other hand, that would be the AI version, why they can potentially backfire and turn us essentially into shallower people.
Hmm. Wow. So what currently exists Angel Kids AI, and what currently exists to help our children to flourish within their creativity and not do it for them?
Yeah. So right now, in most cases, I think it's best that the parent be alongside of the kid in this space.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I think it's a case almost like with the browser. Like, I wouldn't leave a browser to a 9-year-old without any guardrails.
Hmm.
So, I mean, we're trying to build that all built into Angel Kids, but it's not the answer to everything. It hopefully will solve a really serious problem. But when you think about the educational side of this, there's companies like Merlin Mind is one that's interesting.
Okay.
And they've
Merlin
been
Mind.
trying to build a kid safe like curriculum based
Mm.
AI. And these
Okay.
are very well intentioned people. They're backed by a very thoughtful VC called Learn that is all about human flourishing.
Okay.
So there are some good guys in this trying to do really good work. There aren't enough, probably. I would say that Khan Academy is another good example. So Khan Academy has been working with OpenAI, and what they've done with their AI bot, Khan Amigo, is just magic.
Mm.
And it's powerful. It's something, though, that has been built with that same concern of we're not here to have the kid get answers. We are deeply knowledgeable of education. We're here to basically create personal tutoring. And we know that personal tutoring will advance and accelerate a kid's growth.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the promise of AI is if we have, and once again, when you think about it, there's not advertising there. Their business model is aligned to their customer getting a certain growth. In this case, the kids of their customer getting a certain growth. When the business model is well aligned, you tend to find better products, healthier products. When the person on the other end is a means to an end, like in so many of these attention and advertising based models, it almost always drives into exploited use of AI.
Mm-hmm. Is ChatGPT safe for kids to use?
On its own, no. Okay. So not if you were to log in and you have a kid start pounding away at any question they want, there is a decent probability they'll run into things that you wouldn't want as a parent them exposed to, especially younger kids. Mm-hmm. This is probably more true of 13 and below.
Okay.
If your kid is 13 to 17, it's a little less risky, but it's more likely to be abused as a way to replace their work and their thinking, especially in schooling. Mm-hmm. Because there are not safeguards for those situations. It is almost like a raw opening to an engine that's a brilliant piece of work, but it's not really designed. It's actually more like an open-ended engine to people building products. And so we really do need those products that live on top of ChatGPT and other types of systems to be able to ensure that, kids have safe access, that elderly have safe access. There are other parties that potentially, could have, struggles with this technology that are not just young kids. But for the most part, I think the risk is that the internet itself is not age appropriate. ChatGPT was trained on the internet. Therefore, unless you specifically overlay on it, it's not going to be trained in a way that's appropriate for kids.
So how do we transition as a society from harm to protection when it comes to the AI technologies so that parents can know whether or not an AI technology is going to be safe for their children?
So this cuts across 2 or 3 different dimensions, I think. So, one is I think you've got to look at the companies and their track records. I mean, I don't expect most parents to become like accomplished technical engineers.
Right.
So I think telling parents, you got to understand this. You have to understand what a transformer is. I mean, I thought transformer was a toy. It's actually some building block of AI, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's not really fair any more than it would be to say, understand how car engines work before you actually go buy a car and be able to put one together. It's kind of silly.
There's no standard. Right.
Yes, but you can compare what we probably are in the early phases of. I know Common Sense Media is working on this as well.
Okay.
We're in the early phases of people rating and reviewing AI related to young people. Mm-hmm. I think we have to stay close attention to that until we see some things that get great ratings and have vetting. Mm-hmm. Then parents should sort of be co-pilots with the kid in using AI. Mm-hmm. I think I wouldn't deny it to them. I think it's a really interesting kind of thing to show them and expose them to relative to what it can do. Mm-hmm. But I think it's extremely important that we not leave them alone with it. And that's kind of where we're at. Now, there'll be companies, and I plan on Angel Kids being one, and hopefully there'll be many things like this, where we will design from the beginning, like the language model that we're going to allow people to access and chat with. Like we will have guarantees that it doesn't say the wrong thing to a 5-year-old versus a 9-year-old.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That it has in mind, it defers. Like the magic of what we do is we will answer numerous questions. We'll try to answer at the right level for that child. And if it's a topic that's either, inappropriate entirely, like it's going to get deferred and said, we don't talk about that. It's better for your parents. Mm-hmm. There's other categories where the AI will give a high level answer, almost like you ask about Santa Claus. And, it's going to end up talking about, Santa Claus is this kind of person, and here's people have different views about it. And then, then parents might be brought into the equation. Like, what does your parents think about Santa Claus? And so that brings the family together. And that's kind of how we designed it. And I think that is probably one of the better approaches, because it's not on us as a company to decide, like things that are factual, not factual. I think we have an obligation to have high veracity. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to these sort of value divergence areas where there's a broad diversity of views and population, that has to be given over to the parents because they have both the moral and legal responsibility around that to the caregivers.
Yeah.
And the AI needs to be a tool they can use, not a replacement of it.
I love the approach, and it's something that I do in my home is tech together. So we are always doing whatever it is related to tech, it's together. And a lot of parents are handing the devices or the phones to get something done. And a lot of times the kids are accessing all kinds of apps that are unsafe. And so if we back up, tech companies across the board are not required to be safe for kids. And that's why our legislators have been working on federal legislation to make tech safer. So what bills are you feeling will help us protect our kids?
Yeah, so there are a set of those bills. I'm really only like super deeply involved in COSA. I think,
let's just talk about that.
Before some changes, I thought Stop CSAM was one that absolutely needed to be dealt with and put forward as well. There's probably a few tweaks. It had a few tweaks on the Senate side and stumbled a bit.
Okay.
But I think that the core premise of it is an absolute essential. People, like, if you're not blocking like a criminal activity like CSAM, like, you shouldn't get the protections and the identification. I think the idea is brilliant.
Yeah. Right.
And highly supportive of Senator Graham and the other senators who had put that forward. Having said that, I do believe COSA is the linchpin. So the Kids Online Safety Act, because it is the beginning of creating a framework that puts into balance the potential of technology with the responsibilities of technology. And that has been out of balance for a couple of decades now, where we basically provided a complete laissez-faire attitude on what technology was allowed to do, what tech companies were allowed to do in their business model, and the side effects of what they had built. And we've given them carte blanche immunity essentially on that, due to both the poor way Section 230 was written, but also a lot of the way the courts have used it, which has been really poor. And with the Nyla Anderson case, there's finally daylight that some judge or panel is saying it was never supposed to be that absurd.
Right.
And so there's daylight, but it's taken how many years of these cases being thrown out for us to see a couple of rays of daylight. And every time Net Choice comes up with some crazy thing that maybe some judge, like in Utah, you might have seen, where they look at the algorithmic recommendations of a platform provider as being First Amendment speech that's protected by the platform. And I'm like, that's an algorithm. That's like saying a design plan for a Boeing airplane is First Amendment speech. It's ridiculous. It's preposterous.
Yeah.
And so like a recipe of I don't know. So like there's a difference between something you would copyright and something that's like just free speech. And the idea that we're giving so much agency to companies instead of just realizing the First Amendment was mostly there to protect the agency of people.
Right.
Like that's another kind of challenge. And it's played out in campaign finance as well in other ways. But yeah, I really think that the Kids Online Safety Act, because of what it does by emulating an idea that actually the UK put in law a couple of years ago with the duty of care inside their Online Safety Act, it starts to create a level of balance and makes tech no longer the only industry that has no duty of care on basic things. The only industry where product liability is almost non-existent.
Yeah.
And when it's basically the major drivers of our stock market, it's the largest portion of market capitalization in our markets today is the tech industry. The idea that they don't have to do this is even more absurd because they're essentially immensely wealthy with the means to do it. And we're just saying, well, we understand. I mean, people are dying on the roads, but seatbelts, that's just a First Amendment problem with the car makers. And so, I mean, some of these arguments to me are just beyond absurd. Now, I understand some of the arguments that have been made around that, you could bully these companies with COSA, into taking down certain content and so forth. And that's actually just a matter of making sure the rule of construction, everything is all really clean, because it's definitely not the way it's done. But I think the big thing we have to really hit back on is, like, it is absurd to treat these companies' core technologies and algorithms that create tons of money for them as essentially First Amendment protected speech. It's just bizarre. And if it's not, it means they're liable. If it is, it means they can do whatever the heck they want and they'll never be liable in our country. So we have to basically attack that proposition. We need to, if there are judges you can vote on and you have a judge that goes that way, vote them out. I mean, I would even look at, especially with the kids involved. I mean, I would even look at who can you recall, like on some of these things. I guess some of the cases around 230 are so egregious and these sort of First Amendment ish weird expansions are so egregious that there needs to be a real revisiting, of who's interpreting this.
Amazing. I haven't thought about that. Is looking at the judges that are making decisions on these cases and continuing to perpetuate harm by misinterpreting what was the entire intention of CDA 230 was to protect children. So we're all hopeful that COSA will be moving forward in the House this coming week. This will be going live after that. So check back to other episodes and my Instagram for updates on COSA. But I want to close out by talking about your approaches in your household, because right now, social media is not safe. Tech is not safe by design. And I know you have boys that are 5 and 8, right?
Yep. 5 and 8.
So how are you integrating tech and AI into your family life in a safe way?
So of course they've been testers of Angel Kids along the way. And so one of these new thing, in fact, my youngest son is actually named Angel, and that's where it comes from.
Oh, cute.
So, my older son is named Timothy. And so he got my name. And so the least I could do with my younger one is to name the next thing I built, for him. And he's one of those, deep feeling kids, if you're familiar with that, like kind of construct.
Yeah.
And so I'll give a little example. Like, technology is a lot more enticing and hard for him to get good boundaries on than my 8-year-old. But both of them have given too much time, and too much time might be an hour or an hour and a half. I mean, we can look at exactly, both of them can get pulled in too much. But my younger, it might be 15 minutes or 30 minutes now, feels like one of the only things that works without him getting overly attached to it and too engaged.
Okay.
And so I think for parents that have, kids that are neurodiverse or have other kinds of challenges, like, it's even more important to like guard their brains, which will be kind of activated very harshly by games, by content that's overly like, I guess exciting or violent or otherwise.
Yeah.
And so I think we manage it by time limiting dramatically anything on the week. And often, many days are basically screen free. The exception will be something like I mentioned synthesis earlier. So if my 8-year-old wants to kind of advance his math by a couple of grade levels, which is kind of what he's been doing, then, he's welcome to use that. It's a tool at that point. That's a proper use of technology.
Yeah.
But with that exception, the entertainment and the engrossing usages, we tend to have limitations and have them on the weekends. We make them earn it. So one thing I'll say as a parent is we found that, the kids get to really feeling entitled unless you create, kind of rewards around, okay, they want game time. That's a commodity. It's a value to them. Are they cleaning up after themselves? Are they treating people the right way? So I think it can be managed in a very constructive way. But I think all of it has to be, in very thoughtful proportions.
Yeah.
And you got to watch out for edge cases too. I mean, we have babysitters like anyone else does. And one of the things you have to watch out, I mean, you probably experienced this, but you get some younger babysitters and they think that them being on a phone and your kid watching something or playing with something is completely fine. And it's obviously not. That's not, what you want them to be doing. So your management has to be what you directly control and then what you indirectly control, basically.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, great. And thank you so much for bringing up like the difference in the way that kids interact with technology and how much they can get hooked on it. Any other advice for parents or anything else that we didn't cover that you feel would be important for them to take away today?
So one thing I think is interesting is I do think that one of the biggest risks that comes up with kids, we even see it with ours at this point, is just that ability to off-ramp them from technology in a way that's like not creating a lot of drama and tension. And it's partially because this thing is almost addictive once it goes past a certain threshold, and it's really easy to go past that. I think that trying to set up, kind of, guardrails around like, okay, you're going to get this, but at the end of this, I don't want to hear any like complaining. I don't want it to be a fight because then you're not going to get it tomorrow because it tells me you can't emotionally manage it. And we're often having that conversation with both of our kids and they're, the right way for their age.
Yeah.
Because it's important for them to be in the front of their brain, not the back of their brain when they start the engagement and to hold themselves there to some degree, and allows them to develop resilience. Because when they go in passively and it's a way to just eat up time, then they're going to get sucked in. But if it's framed, then your kid views it as, I have to be aware of this. I have to be almost like looking at myself as I'm playing it of, am I getting too agitated or upset by it? I think that
Yeah.
and the ability to be managing when that happens so that it doesn't interfere with their sleep patterns.
Mm-hmm.
Because, having too late an engagement with certain technology will often interfere with their sleep patterns. And that's something that can have a lot of cascading effects. So we're pretty mindful of that. So it's normally an afternoon thing. We rarely want it to be a morning thing because there's a lot of things you need to get up and focus on and do
Mm-hmm.
and be kind of healthy and active.
Yeah.
And then in the evening, like there has to be some buffer period where no, it's, you can listen to a book or you can read it together, the two boys,
Mm-hmm.
things like that actually get them to a place of calm and a place of kind of
Mm-hmm.
settling down where their brain is ready to process. And
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of what we've learned. And we don't learn it because we've read a bunch of things and we know all this. We've learned it the hard way. We've learned it by
Mm-hmm.
watching our kids the next day when we don't do it and then
Yeah.
tried to back them to it. And that's frankly how most of us as parents learn. We rarely get the manual. We rarely
Mm-hmm.
have the time to read the 30 books or 50 books it would take to feel remotely competent. So we
Mm-hmm.
do the best we can and we basically adapt because we
Yeah.
care about our kids and we're trying to watch them and love them and listen to them.
Yeah. And what you shared about how the brain works and what happens when they're asleep is so important here because they need that good level of sleep. They need that long period of sleep. And one thing I wanted to mention here is that they may just do it on their own too when it comes to their sleep routine. I mean, my son, we don't do devices at bedtime, but he plays Legos for a while. And then he told me the other day, he said, at 8 o'clock, I start reading until I get sleepy. And I was like, me too. Like,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
so cute that he figured that out on his own, that the reading really calms you down and gets you ready for that sleep time.
Yeah, it's a great like habit and love to put into your kids at a young age,
Yeah.
and it's going to prove like very helpful to them. We're all overwhelmed, parents, getting surprised by things, and so whenever I throw these things out, like I guess one thing I'd send anyone that's listening is like, I'm just in it there with you, and you're in it with me, and we're all just trying to figure this thing out.
Mm-hmm.
With Angel Kids, like that's one tool we think can make it easier. And there's some aspects of it. For instance, there's an aspect that idea of like pulling away technology.
Mm-hmm.
We actually created a way for Angel to like create time limits, like on parental command,
Yeah.
by texting the AI and saying, can you wind this down in 5 minutes? And then the device will actually wind down
Oh,
in that
wow.
window
Wow.
of time. And
Cool.
it'll be done in a way that's not so disruptive. And then we found that kids will naturally get the time limit and put the thing down.
Amazing. Okay, so where can parents learn about Angel Kids and when will it be available? There's a wait list now, right?
Yes. So angelkids.ai is our site. You'll see some of our capabilities and what we're building.
Okay.
There'll be increasing, I think, coverage of it as we build it further.
Mm-hmm.
We've been testing with a couple hundred families over the summer, so we're getting a lot of feedback in that, adding capabilities that we've learned that they wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And we plan on, before the end of the year, releasing to that wait list.
Okay.
And there'll be some special like things for people that decide to sign up on the wait list in terms of when they get it and maybe the economics of what it is, because it will be a subscription-based product from day
Mm-hmm.
one.
Okay.
But it is also something that we plan on, having a very reasonable entry price and then a way on a per kid basis, but also capping it for families of 2 kids. So larger families don't have a disproportionate kind of, or sorry, like unreasonable kind of cost in that.
Yeah, amazing.
So, and so we're looking into where we plan on that. And then I would say no later than early next year, it will probably be generally available.
Okay.
But, we're also, for us, the number one thing is we have to keep getting the same testing feedback to ensure we've hit all these edge cases of safety.
Mm-hmm.
And we have the data to prove that it's really helpful to those kids. And so far, all of that tracks.
Okay.
But we will not ship something. We will not, move fast and break anybody. So we will not ship something until we have complete conviction of that. And I'm thankful I've got 3 amazing investors behind us in terms of funds.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is explicitly an AI for good fund.
Oh, cool.
Okay. And so, and he previously built like a $6 billion AI company. And then he decided to go invest in this space to make sure AI was a net positive for the world.
Wow.
And so we have other like parties like Magnify, which is a group of 2 amazing women that are trying to build the technology to support the care economy of the future, realizing parents are overwhelmed. So their mandate is to go build things like Angel.
Wow.
And so we're very blessed in who we have as our backers. And I think that because of that, we're also going to have the patience that, I don't have investors like knocking and saying, when is this coming out kind of thing. They know the schedule and they know that it has to be when this thing is ready and compelling and almost bulletproof from a safety standpoint. And the fact we haven't put it out yet doesn't mean it's not. It just means we're taking in enough data to have deep confidence. And we're basically expanding our reach as we have more confidence, which is how you would do a product like this, I think, instead of just give it to the world and hope nothing goes wrong.
Thank you for not rushing it like these other companies are doing. First of all, I would love to test it if there's openings for that for our family.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Okay. And then I would love to do a demo when you're getting close to launching so I can release that and parents can see a demo of it and access it right when it's ready to go. So thank you, Tim, for having this conversation. You're a wealth of knowledge. I could have gone a bunch of different directions. I had to keep cutting myself back. So let's have more conversations soon. And I hope that parents go to angelkids.ai and join the waitlist for their product. And I will bring you more when it's ready to launch. So thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Nikki. Thank you for all that you do, and keep it up. We need it. We need your voice out there and the people you showcase to change this environment we have today.
Thank you, Tim. Appreciate that.